She bought a stranger for $1 to survive the winter. That was the part no one would understand. But survival made people do strange things, and Marbeth Greeley had already lost too much to pride. She was alone, pregnant, and walking with two small children through a town that barely earned the name. 3 buildings, a leaning church with no bell, and a saloon that smelled like secrets and beer. Wind tore through the air like it wanted to cut skin from bone, and the dust bit her cheeks as she held her shawl tighter, keeping her round belly hidden beneath thin fabric. She didn't cry. Not anymore. Not since Kansas. Her daughter Joanna walked beside her, barely 8, already looking like she understood too much. She held her younger brother Matthew's hand tightly, and he hadn't spoken in 3 days. He was 5, small and silent. The last thing he saw in Kansas was their father collapsing after a banker's bullet, and the preacher calling their family a sin for staying on land that wasn't rightfully hers. She left after that, not with a plan, just with a bag, 2 children, and a belly full of the last thing her husband gave her. She caught rides from cattlemen, walked when they stopped offering, and took help when it came, even if it came with a stare she hated. This town, though, offered something different, something strange. A man up for hire, not a slave. Not anymore. Just a quiet agreement written on a piece of torn paper nailed to a fence post. Man of the mountains seeks lawful employment. Will work for food and shelter through winter. $1 contract. No questions. Most folks in the town laughed at it, called it a joke. But Marbeth didn't laugh. She just clutched her last coin and stared at the words until her hands went cold. Because a man meant more than firewood or labor. A man in the house meant they might survive past January. She found him near the edge of town. Tall, wrapped in a wool coat worn smooth at the shoulders, his beard thick and black. He looked like someone who hadn't spoken in years. He didn't offer a name, didn't ask questions, just nodded when she handed over the dollar. $1. That was all it took to shift the course of her life. As he helped load her few belongings into a borrowed wagon with a cracked wheel, she finally asked, "What's your name?" The man looked at her for a long second, then at the children, then back at her swollen belly. "Reckon you'll know it soon enough." She should have been scared. Maybe somewhere inside she was. But fear had become a companion, not a warning. So they left, just like that. The sun dipped behind brittle trees, and the road rose in winding curls as the mountains began to breathe cold into their bones. They didn't talk. Didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't sharp. It just waited like something asleep, but listening. When they reached the cabin, it wasn't what she expected. It was more. 2 rooms, smoke already trailing from the chimney, like the place had been waiting. He helped her down from the wagon without touching her skin. Showed her the cot, the fire, the shelves lined with canned food. Didn't speak more than a word. But everything was ready, like he knew she'd come. That night, while the children slept wrapped in unfamiliar quilts, she sat near the fire, watching the flames flicker across the wood. Her back ached, her belly shifted, and the stranger finally spoke. "You're too thin for a woman that far along." She didn't look at him, just nodded. "Been walking too long. You got a plan for the birth?" "No," her voice cracked. "Do you?" He hesitated, then said, "Midwife's a week south. You won't make it. Snow comes early." She turned to look at him. Really look. Something stirred behind those gray eyes. Not pity, not want, just something she couldn't name. She didn't ask anything more. Just listen to the wind, try to find its way in. By morning, he was outside splitting wood. She stood on the porch wrapped in her thin shawl, the baby inside her pressing against her spine. The children were still asleep. He didn't pause when he saw her, just spoke between strikes. "You got a strong back for someone carrying 3. She didn't correct him. The baby counted. Then he asked, without turning, "You got a name?" "Marbeth," she said. He froze mid-swing, slowly turned, eyes narrowed. "Marbeth Greeley," she added. And that's when he said it, soft, like it had lived in him for years. "I know. You prayed my name once. I heard it." Her breath caught. She took a step back, hand to her belly. Because in that moment, everything shifted. She didn't move. Not at first. His words hit her like cold water. She stared at him, heart thudding, her hand still resting on the curve of her belly, as if it could protect her from what she didn't understand. "You prayed my name once. But she didn't remember doing that. Didn't remember this man at all. He looked back at her, calm and steady, like he'd been waiting years to say those words. Inside, Joanna stirred. Marbeth heard her small voice whispering to Matthew, comforting him as he woke. She blinked hard and forced herself to step back into the cabin, closing the door behind her. The warmth that had felt strong the night before now felt weaker, like something was missing or changed. Joanna rubbed her eyes. "Mama, where are we?" Marbeth knelt and hugged both children close. "Someplace safe," she whispered. It wasn't a lie. Not yet. But it didn't feel fully true either. Later, she watched from the window as the man stacked wood near the porch. He moved like someone who didn't waste energy, slow but sure. His shoulders strong, his eyes always drifting toward the ridge like he expected something to come. She noticed things she hadn't before. The scar across his knuckles, the way his jaw clenched when the wind shifted. Like he wasn't just watching the land, but remembering something. When he came inside with more wood, she stepped aside without speaking. He brushed snow from his coat and sat at the table like it wasn't his first time doing it. She poured the last of his stew into a bowl and placed it in front of him. He ate quietly, no words, no hurry. Then she spoke, barely above a whisper. "You said I prayed your name." He looked up. "You did. Behind a chapel, years ago. Outside Ellensburg. You were 17. You were bleeding." Her hand gripped the edge of the table. Her lungs stopped moving. She hadn't spoken of that night in a decade. The chapel had burned. The man who hurt her had run. She remembered the blood, the cold floor, and her own voice crying out for anyone to hear her. "I wasn't there by accident," he said. "I found you." Her voice cracked. "Why don't I remember?" "Because I didn't let you," he answered. She stared at him. "What?" He looked past her, toward the fire. "Because I was running too." The room went quiet. Only the fire crackled. The children were still, eating their soup, unaware of the storm inside her chest. She didn't know what to feel. Grateful? Angry? She remembered pain, darkness, fear. But now here was this man, saying he had carried her from it, only to vanish. "You left me," she said. "I saved you," he replied, his voice hardening. "Carried you to a widow's house. Told her to find a doctor. Then I left." Her voice shook. "Why?" "Because I wasn't ready to be seen." She sat down slowly across from him. Her eyes burned. His didn't. "What's your name?" she asked. He looked at her, steady. "Clay Maddox." The name hit her like a thunderclap. She had heard it before, whispered in stories, shouted in wanted posters, murmured in towns where people didn't ask too many questions. Clay Maddox. The outlaw. The man who vanished after a gunfight. The one people said robbed a train or saved children from fire. Nobody knew the full truth. And now he sat at her table, eating her stew like he belonged. "You shouldn't have told me," she said. "I know." She wanted to shout, wanted to cry, but she didn't. She just sat there, heart pounding, baby turning inside her belly like it too felt something change. That night, the wind howled harder than before. The cabin creaked like it remembered old pain. She lay awake with one hand on her stomach, eyes on the shadow by the fire. He was carving something. Slow, steady. The scrape of the knife soft, like a clock ticking. "You said you were running," she whispered in the dark. "From what?" He paused. The carving stopped. "Myself," he said, "and for what I did." She didn't ask more. Didn't need to. She knew what it meant to carry shame too heavy for words. She turned toward the wall and let the sound of his knife guide her into sleep. The day started to settle into a rhythm, quiet and heavy like snow piling up outside. Clay chopped wood, hunted small game, and didn't speak more than necessary. But he stayed. He didn't vanish like other men had. He was just there. The children watched him, at first with fear, then with quiet curiosity. Joanna began asking him questions about the trees, about rabbit traps, about how to build a fire that wouldn't go out at night. Matthew didn't speak yet, but he followed Clay outside, copying how he walked and how he carried wood. Clay never forced them close, never raised his voice. But slowly, the air inside the cabin began to change. Marbeth washed clothes in melted snow, cooked what little Clay brought in, and tried to forget what he said about Ellensburg. But she couldn't. Not when he looked at her like he remembered everything. One night, after the fire burned low and the children had gone to sleep, Clay finally spoke again. "I didn't know it was you," he said, not looking at her. "Not when I nailed up that notice." She looked up from her sewing. "But you remembered. When I said my name." He nodded slowly. "After that, yes." She paused, watching his face. "Why did you leave me? After saving me?" His hands tensed around the piece of wood he was carving. "Because I was half a man back then. I thought if I stayed, I'd ruin you." She didn't answer. "I'm not sure what I am now," he added. "But I know I won't leave again." It wasn't said loudly. It wasn't dramatic. But it was a promise. A quiet thread woven between them. 2 mornings later, that thread was tested. Clay had gone to check the traps. Marbeth was pulling quilts down from the loft when the dog barked. Sharp, wild, panicked. Her chest tightened. She rushed to the window. Riders. 3 of them. Coming slow over the ridge, their horses cutting shadows into the pale snow. One of them made her blood freeze. Clay returned just minutes later, rifle in hand. His face was stone. "You know them?" he asked. She nodded, her voice dry. "The tall one. EMTT case. He rode with the men who killed my husband." Clay's jaw clenched. "They here for you?" "Or you?" she said, meeting his eyes. "Both," he replied without hesitation. The children stood behind her, silent. Joanna's hand clutched her mother's skirt. Matthew stood by the table, fists clenched. "They won't shoot first," Clay said calmly. "Men like that want fear before they want blood." He moved around the cabin like he'd done this before. Loaded his rifle. Pulled a revolver from under the floor. Handed her a shotgun older than either of them. He didn't ask if she knew how to use it. She nodded. "I'll take the children to the crawl space under the root cellar." "Only if they start shooting," he said. "Otherwise, they stay where we can see them." Joanna tugged at her skirt. "Mama, are they bad men?" Marbeth didn't lie. "Yes." Clay stood by the window. "They want to see me crawl," he muttered. "And they think hurting you is how they get that." She swallowed. "What?" He looked at her then. There was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before, something dark and buried. "Because once I did the same to someone else." She didn't ask what he meant. The way he said it was enough. Whatever Clay Maddox had done, he carried it like a stone inside his chest. That night, they didn't sleep. Clay moved between windows, quiet as a shadow. Marbeth sat by the fire, shotgun across her lap. The children huddled under quilts, pretending not to be scared. When the fire burned low, Clay sat beside her. "I left you once because I thought you'd be better without a man like me," he said suddenly. "But every step I took after that, I heard your voice." She looked at him. His face, hardened by time, now soft in the firelight. "You saved me," she said. "That still counts." He smiled faintly. "I aim to do it again." Before she could answer, a sound broke through the still, metal striking metal. One of the bells Clay had tied to the trees. He stood, rifle ready. "They're here." Another bell. Then another. Then a shot, sharp and clean. It hit the porch post, splintering wood. Clay slammed the door shut. "They've got torches," he said. A second shot hit the wall, kicking up dust. Marbeth ran, pulled the children from the back room, and shoved them into the crawl space. Joanna clutched her doll. Matthew didn't cry. He was too scared to cry. Glass shattered. Clay fired back, fast and clean. One of the riders ducked behind the barn. "They're trying to smoke us out," he said. "They want to burn us." She knew what came next. Clay looked at her. "I'll draw them off. You take the kids down the creek." "No," she said. "Not without you." He stepped close, pressed a hand to her face. "You don't owe me anything." She grabbed his wrist. "I'm not surviving just to survive anymore." He closed his eyes, nodded. "Then we finish this." The final attack came fast. All 3 men rushed toward the cabin together, hoping numbers would win. But they didn't expect Clay to be waiting. He stepped out onto the porch first, rifle aimed steady, and fired. The first man dropped, screaming, blood blooming on his chest. Marbeth, crouched at the window, raised the shotgun. Her hands didn't shake. She fired once, hitting the second man in the leg. He collapsed, howling. The last one, EMTT case, made it to the porch. Clay dropped his rifle and slammed into him. They crashed hard, fists flying, boots scraping across frozen ground. There was nothing clean about the fight, just fury, pain, and the weight of too many buried sins. Marbeth stood frozen at the door, shotgun still in hand. She saw Yemtiti reach for his gun, and without thinking, stepped outside. "Don't," she said, leveling the barrel at his chest. He paused, blood on his teeth, eyes locking with hers. Then something shifted in his face, not fear. Something sadder. "You were always stronger than him," he said softly. Clay didn't give him time for another word. His fist connected one last time. Yemtiti collapsed, unconscious. By morning, it was over. They buried the bodies in silence. Not near the cabin. Not near the old graves that mattered. Just far enough away that the ground could forget them. The children watched from the porch, too quiet for their age. Joanna held Matthew's hand, her face pale but calm. They didn't cry. They just waited. After the last grave was filled, Clay stood beside the stream, washing blood from his hands. Marbeth came up behind him, arms crossed tight. "That was the last of them," he said. "Every man who could come after me. They're either dead or too broken to try again. Then it's really over." He turned to face her, and his eyes, usually hard, usually guarded, were open now, vulnerable. "Do you believe I deserve peace?" She reached up, brushed her thumb along the rough line of his jaw. "You've earned it." The next morning, they packed the wagon. The road south was icy but wide. The old town was behind them now. They passed a different one with a real store, glass windows, and a quiet street that didn't watch every stranger with suspicion. Marbeth bought fabric for dresses, nails for repairs, and a ribbon for Joanna. The girl lit up like she hadn't smiled in months. It felt almost like summer, like hope. Clay stood near the post outside, watching her as she counted coins. He didn't speak, but when she looked back at him, he didn't look away. That night, they sat on the porch. Clara slept in her arms, cheeks red and warm. Inside, the children's laughter echoed faintly, soft and wild. Clay spoke quietly. "I never told you why I said your name that first day." Marbeth looked at him. "Why did you?" He stared at the sky. "I heard it in a dream. After the war. I was bleeding in a field, half dead. I heard a woman's voice say my name, real soft. Then she said hers. Marbeth." She blinked. Her lips parted, but no words came. "I thought I imagined it," he said, "till I saw you standing there, with those children. And you looked at me like you knew I wouldn't hurt you." "I didn't know," she whispered. "Not really." "You did," he said. "You just forgot." She leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyes closing slowly. "Then I guess we were meant to remember together." They sat that way until the stars thickened and the wind softened. The cabin behind them wasn't just shelter anymore. It was something built not by hammer and nails, but by staying, by not running. Inside, the children slept. Clara breathed softly, tiny chest rising and falling. The world had quieted for the first time in years. And in that stillness, Marbeth whispered a prayer. But this time, it wasn't for help. It was thanks. Spring came slowly. The snow didn't vanish overnight. It melted bit by bit, dripping from the roof, slipping down the trees, and revealing patches of brown earth that smelled of something new. The wind still carried a chill, but it didn't feel cruel anymore. It felt clean, like the world had been scrubbed. Marbeth stood barefoot on the porch one morning, holding baby Clara close to her chest. The air was cold, but she didn't mind. Joanna and Matthew ran down the slope behind the house, laughing. Real, free laughter, not the kind forced by fear. She closed her eyes for a moment and just listened. Inside, Clay sat at the table, fixing a strap on Joanna's boot. He worked slow and careful, like each stitch meant something. He didn't talk much, but he didn't need to. He had started fixing things around the house like a man who knew what it meant to lose everything. Like repairing broken boards could repair himself too. Later that day, Marbeth found him near the creek, rolling up old wire from a collapsed fence. "You thinking of keeping animals?" she asked, smiling. He squinted at her through the sunlight and shrugged. "Thinking about what comes next." She tilted her head. "And what does that look like?" He looked at the house, at the field, at the distant ridge. "I've lived a long time waiting for something to break. Fences, people, promises. But this is the first thing I don't want to lose." She stepped closer and touched his arm gently. "Then don't." The snow wasn't the only thing melting. Strangers began passing through the trail again. Wagons creaked along the road. Riders came down the ridge looking for shelter or food or something warm. Most didn't stay long, but some knocked on the door. One stayed too long. It was near dusk. Marbeth was lighting the lanterns. Joanna and Matthew were near the fire, sharing stories. Clara slept peacefully. Then the knock came, slow, polite. Clay opened the door. A tall man stood on the porch, coat wet from rain, boots worn thin. A revolver hung at his hip. "Evening," he said, voice rough. "I'm looking for a man they used to call Maddox." Clay didn't move. "No Maddox here." "You sure?" The stranger glanced past him into the cabin. Heard he ran with Yim Titi Finch. Word is he's playing house now. Got a woman, a baby, even a porch. Clay stepped out slowly, eyes sharp. "That's old business. It's done." The man shrugged. "Thing is, I ain't got a family, so I got time." Behind Clay, Marbeth held Clara tighter. Her heart raced, but her hands didn't shake. Clay spoke low and calm. "You'll turn around and walk away. Because if you come back, I won't give you the chance to knock." The man smiled, slow, thin, mean. Then he turned and disappeared into the dark. That night, Clay didn't sleep. He sat near the fire, rifle across his knees, watching. Not the flames, but something far beyond them. Something from the past. Marbeth didn't speak. She simply kissed the top of his head, placed a blanket around his shoulders, and went to bed. The next morning, Matthew found a rabbit in one of Clay's traps. He ran up to the porch, breathless, holding it high. "Can we cook it?" Clay nodded. "You'll help me clean it." Marbeth stood at the door, baby in her arms, and watched as her quiet little boy knelt beside Clay, asking questions without fear. He didn't flinch at the answers. That night, they cooked the rabbit over open fire. The smell drifted through the trees like a promise that they were still standing. After dinner, when the children settled, Marbeth turned to Clay. "I want to stay," she said suddenly. "I want this to be home." He looked confused. "It already is." "No," she said gently. I want to build it. Not just stay in someone else's cabin. I want it to be ours." He was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded once. "Spring's coming. We'll build something better." And they did. Over the next few weeks, they tore down the old shed. Saved the good wood. Clay marked new beams. Marbeth mixed mortar with her bare hands. Joanna carried nails. Matthew painted the walls with pine tar. They didn't talk about the stranger who came. But Marbeth noticed how Clay looked toward the ridge more often. How his right hand sometimes twitched near his belt. One night, she touched his shoulder. "We can leave if we need to." He turned to her. "I'm done running, but I'll keep you safe." She believed him. That night, as Clara slept between them, Marbeth lay awake, tracing circles on the baby's back. She listened to Clay's breathing, steady beside her. And for the first time, her prayers weren't about escaping. They were about building a future. It started 3 days later, just after sunrise. The children were outside, gathering wild onions near the edge of the trees. Clay stepped onto the porch with his coffee and froze. Marbeth followed his eyes and saw it too, a glint of metal on the far ridge. Just a flicker at first, then another. 2 riders, maybe 3. One of them wore a long, dark coat, his horse moving like it knew battle. Clay's voice was calm, but sharp. "Inside. Now." Marbeth didn't argue. She called the children quickly, her voice steady even though her hands trembled. Joanna grabbed Matthew's arm, and they ran, slipping inside just as Clay locked the door and pulled his rifle from behind the stove. He handed her a pistol, the one he'd kept hidden under the floorboards. "They're here for me," he said, "but they'll come through us to get it." He nodded. No fear in his eyes, just a steady knowing. "Do you remember how to shoot?" "I remember enough." He looked at her, really looked, like he was memorizing every line of her face. Then he kissed her, deep and sure, the kind of kiss that doesn't ask questions. It just says goodbye in case. Outside, the riders came slow. 3 of them now. 2 rode ahead, lean and tense like wolves that had tasted blood. The third hung back, wearing a wide hat that shaded most of his face. But the way his horse moved, calm, trained, deadly, made Clay stiffen beside the window. Marbeth stayed low near the door, pistol resting in her palm. Not shaking, not blinking. Clara slept in her cradle, swaddled tight, unaware that war stood just beyond the trees. Joanna sat with Matthew beside the hearth. Neither child spoke. They were quiet, not out of fear, but respect. Trust. They'd seen what their mother could become, what Clay already was. The three riders stopped at the edge of the clearing. Clay stepped outside slowly, choosing a place where the morning light hit his back. He stood tall and unreadable. The first rider, thin with hollow cheeks, pulled his horse back. Been a long time, Maddox. Clay didn't blink. That name's dead. Maybe, but ghosts got long shadows. The second man leaned forward, squinting at the cabin. Heard you got yourself a family now. Or maybe they bought you. The man in the duster didn't speak. He dismounted slow, careful, and stepped into the light. His face was rough, scarred along the jaw. His eyes were pale blue and held too much silence. You don't remember me, do you? The man asked, voice like wind through bones. Clay didn't answer. I remember you. You shot my brother outside Red Hollow. Left him screaming in the dirt. Clay's jaw tightened. If I shot him, he gave me reason. He was 16. There was no reply, only wind. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I've waited 10 years to watch you bleed. Inside, Marbeth moved across the cabin quietly. She kissed Claire's forehead, whispered something only a mother would say. Then she crouched by the door and pulled the hammer of her pistol back, slow and soft. Outside, the first man reached for his holster. Clay didn't wait. His rifle cracked once. The man dropped backward off his horse like a rag doll. Before the second could react, Clay dropped to a knee and fired again. The second rider screamed, clutching his shoulder, blood pouring through his coat. The third man, the one in the duster, didn't flinch. He walked forward, slow, like he didn't care if bullets flew. He pulled out his revolver. You're fast, he said, but I didn't come for a duel. He fired, not at Clay, but at the cabin. The bullet tore through the wall, with splintered inches from where Marbeth crouched. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She stood, opened the door with one hand, and fired twice. The first shot missed. The second hit the duster man in the leg. He screamed and dropped. His gun hit the ground and skidded away. Clay was already moving. He ran across the yard and stomped his boot down on the man's revolver before he could reach it. Go ahead, the man panted. Kill me. You've done worse. Clay stared down, rifle aimed. I didn't come here to be the man I was, he said. But you came looking for him. Marbeth stepped out, gun still raised. He threatened our home. Clay looked down one last time, then turned away. Crawl off this land. If I see you again, I won't hesitate. The man spat blood, but didn't argue. He crawled toward his horse. The second rider was still alive, holding his ruined shoulder. Marbeth stood over him, breathing hard. What now? She asked. Clay met her eyes. We bury the first. Send the others back broken. Joanna stepped out then, holding Matthew's hand tight, both wide-eyed but standing. Marbeth knelt beside them. It's over now, Joanna asked softly. Will they come back? Marbeth looked at Clay. He shook his head. No, she said. Not again. They buried the dead man at the edge of the woods. Not near the family graves. Not where peace belonged. No words, just shovels and silence. Later, Clay stood by the creek, washing his hands, red fading into the water. It's done, he said. She joined him, arms folded against the breeze. You believe I deserve peace? He asked again. She looked at him, long and quiet. You already have it, she said. Right here. The next morning, they loaded the wagon with baskets and blankets, took the children, and rode south into a newer town, one that hadn't yet learned to judge by names or rumors. The streets were wide, the windows clean, and the shopkeeper smiled at Marbeth like she belonged. She bought flour, sugar, nails, thread, and a tiny red ribbon Joanna couldn't stop staring at. The girl beamed when Marbeth tied it in her hair. It felt like summer came early. That night, they sat on the porch again. It had become a habit. Clara slept on Marbeth's chest. Joanna and Matthew played inside, voices rising and falling like music. Clay sat beside her, quiet. After a long pause, he spoke. I've been thinking. Marbeth gave a tired smile. That's dangerous. He chuckled low. Maybe, but I think this land's got more to offer than just shelter. We could add another room. Maybe keep a milk cow. Take in travelers during the snow. She raised an eyebrow. You want strangers near? He looked straight ahead. Not all strangers stay strangers. Some walk in hungry and end up staying for good. Her eyes softened. You want a life here? I want one with you. She reached for his hand. Then we'll build it together. And they did. Through the rest of spring, they added walls, repaired the shed, replaced the broken boards on the porch. Joanna helped carry nails in a rusty tin. Matthew followed Clay with a hammer too big for his hands. Marbeth helped mix mortar, even when her back ached. Clay made her a rocking chair with old wood. She sat on it most evenings with Clara tucked against her shoulder, humming. One afternoon, a lone rider appeared, a woman with sharp eyes and a dusty coat. Clay's posture stiffened, but she lifted a hand and smiled. Name's Lorna, she said. Passed through here 10 years back. Looks better now. Marbeth stepped out onto the porch. It's ours now. Lorna looked around. I can see that. You've made something out of it. They shared coffee under the porch. Lorna talked about new roads, a growing town down south, and whispers of a rail line cutting through the valleys. But what she said before leaving stuck with Marbeth. There's women out there like you were, with little ones. No place left. A cabin like this, run by someone strong. It could be more than home. It could be hope. That night, Marbeth sat at the table, staring at an old map. Clay walked in and noticed her expression. You thinking of bringing people here? She nodded. Not all at once. Just one at a time. Women like I was. Scared. Tired. But still willing to try again. He sat beside her and placed his hand over hers. Then we build more rooms. A few days later, she gave Lorna a folded letter to carry south. It was short. Just a few words. If you know a mother with nothing left but the will to try again, send her north. There's room here. There's hope. By autumn, another woman arrived. She was young, nervous, and carrying a toddler with wide, watching eyes. Marbeth greeted her with bread, still warm from the oven. Clay didn't speak much, but he repaired the shed into a livable space. It wasn't grand, but it was safe, and more came after that. The path that once led nowhere slowly became something more. A trail women whispered about, passed down like legend. A place where no one asked what you'd done, only what you needed. A place where silence met healing. Where the wind wasn't a threat, and the fire didn't burn you out, it kept you warm. One morning, Marbeth stood at the garden edge with Clara on her hip. She watched Joanna and Matthew help plant potatoes. Clay turned the soil, his sleeves rolled up, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. His movements were slower now, not because he was tired, but because he wasn't in a hurry anymore. Later, she found him sitting under the tree near the creek, an old envelope in his hands. What's that? She asked. He didn't answer right away. Letter from a man I rode with. Years ago. Said if I ever wanted to bury my past, I should find a place where no one knew my name. And did you? He nodded slowly. I tried, but the past still came. It always does. She sat beside him. But you didn't run when it did. You stayed. You fought for us. I killed a man, Marbeth. You saved a family. He looked at her, eyes heavy. I never thought I'd belong to something again. She leaned into him. You didn't just join something. You became everything. He held her, arms wrapped tight, like she was more than a person, like she was a home. That night, after supper and stories and another apple pie, Clay carved a small wooden horse for Matthew. Joanna read from a tattered book. Marbeth hummed softly while nursing Clara, the room lit by firelight. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, earned, built by hand day by day, and it felt like something no one could take. The seasons turned again. By summer, the cabin no longer looked like a hiding place. It looked like a home. The walls had fresh paint, the roof held firm, and the yard was alive with sound. Chickens clucking, boots thudding, children laughing. Life had crept in quiet at first, but now it stretched its arms wide, like it planned to stay. Clay expanded the barn with leftover timber. Marbeth tended to the garden, humming as she watered new green shoots. Clara learned to crawl, then to pull herself up with stubborn little fists. Joanna collected eggs with a ribbon still tied in her hair. Matthew, who once didn't speak for days, now never stopped asking questions. About clouds, about trees, about how Clay held a rifle so steady, and how Marbeth made bread rise with nothing but hands and heat. And Clay, he had changed the most. Not into someone new, but into someone real. His eyes still held shadows, but they no longer ruled him. He smiled more. He hummed sometimes. Once, Marbeth caught him rocking Clara by the fire, whispering an old tune under his breath. She didn't say a word, just watched. One evening, as the stars brightened and the porch creaked under their weight, he turned to her. "I want to marry you." She looked at him, steady. "You sure?" "I've been sure since you said you weren't surviving just to survive anymore." There was no preacher, no dress, just a silver ring Clay shaped himself over the fire. He slipped it on her finger with hands that had once held guns, now holding only promise. Marbeth wept, not from grief, but from something deeper. The kind of joy that doesn't shout. It just settles in your bones. The trail to the cabin stayed open. More women came, some with children, some without. All of them carried something heavy. Marbeth met each one with warm bread, a quilt, and space to breathe. Clay never asked questions, just kept building rooms, kept sharpening tools, kept showing up. Years passed like pages turning. The land grew soft with crops. A small fence surrounded a growing herd of goats. Children chased each other through tall grass. And the sound that once ruled the mountains, wind, emptiness, fear, was replaced by voices. Stories, belonging. But the world never forgets old names. One autumn morning, a rider returned. Not a threat this time. A young man, dusty and quiet, carrying nothing but a note and a worn coat. He asked for shelter, said he'd heard there was a place where broken men could work for food and women didn't have to run. Marbeth looked him over, saw his shaking hands, his silent mouth. She nodded. "You'll earn your place," she said. "Same as everyone." And he did. That night, Clay sat beside the fire, Clara now old enough to sit on his lap. Marbeth handed him a mug of tea, her fingers brushing his. He looked at her, like he still couldn't believe she was real. "I think about that day," he said. "The first one, when you gave me $1 like it was nothing. But it meant everything." She smiled. "I didn't buy you. I asked you to stay. That was the real price. And I paid it," he said. "Every day I stayed. Every time I didn't run." She nodded slowly. "And I forgave you. Not just for what you did before, but for the time I thought you'd leave again." He looked out at the trees, the fence, the candlelight flickering in the window of the newest room they'd built. "This isn't just a place, is it?" he asked. She shook her head. "It's a story, one worth telling." Then, in a whisper, she added, "It's proof that broken people don't have to stay broken." Clay closed his eyes, let those words sink into him like warmth. That night, she wrote another letter. She didn't know where it would end up. Maybe pinned to a post. Maybe passed by hand. But it said, "If you're alone, and all you've got left is a heartbeat and a little bit of fight, come north. There's land here. There's fire. There's a roof. You'll work, you'll cry, and maybe you'll heal." One woman did, and she built something with it. The letter ended. "Bring nothing but your name. We'll help you remember the rest." Moral: sometimes the things that save us don't come with promises or plans. Sometimes they come with silence, splinters, and second chances. But healing begins the moment someone stays. And love is when they don't leave.